Hey, good evening. I'm here to give an introductory lecture on the New Vision as created by primarily Lucian Carr with assistance from Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg as far as we know. So part of what I'm going to endeavor to answer in this communication is what makes a Neal Cassady, what makes a Lucian Carr, these muses of the beats, what makes them different. We know they were different. We know they were special. Much has been written about them, especially in Neal Cassady. Not that they're the only ones, but I'm focusing on them because they're the most famous. And I'm focusing on Lucian because he gave us this concept that I feel can explain the phenomenon that we witnessed in those people. I didn't personally witness either of them, but certainly people that are living did and have said much about them and helped to create their legend. So words that have been used to describe them are magnetic, somehow extra life, possessing extraordinary energy, luminous, like living art, and even divine, with special abilities. And the second question is, if we understand what makes them them, then how can that take us beyond being relegated to imitation, adoration, or even deification of them? In other words, how can the nuts and bolts of what creates these type of people help us to fulfill our highest potential and embodiment? So I'm here to make the case that the New Vision, that these three beat figures, again, primarily Lucian Carr, in 1944, starting in 1944, can help explain this. So in 1944, they were just becoming friends and they were hanging out for the first time. And there was an incredible upsurge of camaraderie, of intellectual stimulation, of reading, of discussions, of all the things that the Beats did during those formative years at Columbia University. Or I don't even think it was a whole year at that point. But it was a special time. And it was only partially fleshed out. But they had aspirations to teach the New Vision far and wide, which they never got around to being able to do. And the reason for that was because of the death of David Kammerer. That's a whole other story, which I won't go into here. But Lucian killed him. And that sidetracked a lot of their conversations. Although they were able to reconstitute themselves as a group, largely it was never quite the same. I think of the New Vision as, we hear the phrase, first thought, best thought. Well, to me, the New Vision was the first and best thought collectively of the Beats. So one of the primary sources and inspirations for the New Vision was the book A Vision by William Butler Yeats, which Lucian really liked. There's several pictures of Lucian when he was in court for Kammerer's murder, holding under his arm or in his hand Burroughs' copy of A Vision. So what was it about that book that made that so formative and important to the New Vision, but to Lucian personally? So I have a theory that I'm going to present now. In order to get into that, though, I want to get in a little bit to Lucian's psychology and his sort of state of mind. He was, we could say a boy. I guess he was about 18 in those days, 18 or 19. He was a young person who had a lot of angst, and he didn't feel a lot of redeeming value in the world, not even in the arts. And so he was searching for answers. He wasn't sure at that time, and there's a fantastic book, what is the, it's right over there, I can see it. The Book of Martyrdom and Artifice. It was escaping me for a second. Which are early journals and poems of Allen Ginsberg. And he goes into a lot of detail about the conversations that he had with Lucian, where Lucian was like just kind of pissed off at the state of the arts. He didn't feel a lot of redeeming value in society at large. He referred to what he saw around him as modern bourgeois culture. And he wasn't sure whether to become a creator himself or to just move on and, as he put it in that book, try life, which he eventually did. So this is his psychology. But in those early days, he carried this book, A Vision, around by William Butler Yeats. What was it? Well, it was a book written by automatic writing. And George Yeats, William Butler Yeats' wife, one day said, we're going to try automatic writing. And what flowed into their lives through their experimentation was this book, A Vision. And it was an esoteric structure for life that was bigger than planet Earth. It was explaining, for example, how and why people are reincarnated, the roles that they are given or that potentially they choose from lifetime to lifetime, and how all of that stuff works. This ended up being kind of a lifeline, and I put forward the idea that it was him. He needed the lifeline because he needed to know that there was a greater order to the universe than he was seeing around him that was causing him so much angst and frustration and disaffection. So it was a counterbalance to this most despicable modern bourgeois culture, which he referred to, a sense of a higher reality. And it was, quite interestingly, an example of occult awareness. Now, in New York City in 1944, when you're 18 or 19, or in your early 20s or late 20s, like Burroughs was, you might have more or less awareness of some of these occult or esoteric movements and activities that were going on. I don't see much evidence that Lucian understood this on any deep level, but with this introduction in this book, there are certainly at least the sort of the rumblings of that idea. The Beats themselves were not really occultists per se. In other words, they didn't come out of any movement or belief system that went into any depth about, some of the things you see in, say, theosophy, although certainly those things were around and were known, and it may be even popular. Maybe they were waning a little bit by the 40s, but there was a bit of a heyday, I think, earlier in the 20th century. But the Beats were independent of that. Now, you could point to Jack saying that, the flow of words that he received in his spontaneous prose came from his deceased brother Gerard. That would certainly fall under the category of occult, but again, it wasn't really such a it wasn't really something they were owning and pushing out there. There was a lot of other things in the movement that was more kind of immediate and was the reason that they were so influential. That would have certainly been on the back burner. So this idea, or this occult book, A Vision, was foundational, but also a bit of an anomaly. But I would point out that there's a really good possibility that this concept of first thought, best thought, was taken from this idea of automatic writing that A Vision was an example of. Because what are you doing in automatic writing? And I should probably go into that a little bit for those that might not know. You just literally put your pen or your typewriter in position, and you just write whatever comes to your mind. And in the case of George and William Butler Yeats, they got this incredible book, A Vision. And it's like literally the first thought is the best thought, and everything coming through this incredible flow that that somehow worked as a piece of writing was the best that it could be, because literally the person was just that conduit, and that's all. So just to summarize again, the emotional lifeline that the concepts in a vision provided for Lucian were important. So that's one factor. But also this idea, which again, to this day sort of undergirds the whole beat movement of first thought, best thought, could very well have been taken from here, because I know Alan has attributed this. I know he often gets credit for this phrase, first thought, best thought, but he actually has pointed to Lucian and saying that actually came from him. So there's no evidence really that he took the content of a vision in the way that it outlined sort of mortal existence and reincarnation and such, literally, but those ideas would have been important to him, or at least the way that the book came about was important to him, again, as that lifeline, that there is actually a higher order than we see around us. And that being that conduit could be a way to create in compelling ways that are not bogged down by what he called the cute tricks of the poets and the artists, as a way to grab the attention of patrons, the public, and make a career and a financial success, which he was so frustrated with. Okay, so let's go from a vision to the new vision. What is the substance of the new vision? And it has three elements. These are in no particular order, but the first one is naked expression is the seed of creativity. Second is evading conventional morality. And the third is the derangement of the senses. I'm not sure about the first two, but I know that derangement of the senses is something that was found in the work of Arthur Rimbaud. In naked expression, this idea of naked expression, it implies a kind of trust, that you are taking the filters off and the audience becomes sort of irrelevant, but at the same time very relevant, because there is the sense of putting it all out there for the masses. The second one, evading conventional morality, is a polar opposite in a certain sense, in that you're distrusting, you're giving the finger to the mass consciousness and the morality that has been passed down through society, through church, through family, through whatever. So this is the tension that in those early conversations with Allen Ginsberg, Lucian was really struggling with. He was trying to figure out whether to conform or to be the creator that could hopefully make a difference. And so these two sort of summarize his inner angst. Now, in the third, derangement of the senses, you have the sense of that lifeline that it was a vision. In other words, if you see beyond, or you set aside the normal perception filters, that there may be something beyond. And what I'm putting forth today, and I should say this too, we've got 10 minutes left in the day, and this is Lucian's 100th birthday. So I've been wanting to do this for a while, but I'm squeezing it in today, and I've been working extra hard to give myself a deadline so it actually happens. So anyway, here it is. Happy birthday, Lucian. When you set aside these perception filters and let the flow happen, what happens is a resolution of the tension between naked expression, that radical trust, and evading conventional morality, which is the distrust. And something beyond can come through. The Beats were known for their derangement of the senses, which usually came through alcohol and drugs. Some more measured and studious, I think in the tradition of Arthur Rimbaud. In the example of Allen Ginsberg, he knew of the dangers of addiction, and so he was very careful not to take the same substance too many times in a row, and he was very studious about creating under the influence, but also describing the difference in perception that he experienced, which I find very fascinating. So, with this esoteric foundation and a little bit of insight into how it relates to the threefold elements of the new vision, I want to introduce, I want to go deeper down that rabbit hole of the occult and esoteric. I mentioned before that the Beats were not known for their occult interests. There was a story, for example, a figure by the name of Gavin Arthur, very interesting person and worthy of a lot of discussion. But he was an astrologer, and he particularly did astrology around the idea of sexual compatibility, and he would give charts to people. And in one of Allen Ginsberg's bios, it talks about him getting a chart that Gavin made for Allen, and Allen wasn't particularly interested in it. I found that really fascinating. And with the exception of some of the like Kerouac feeling like he was channeling his brother Gerard, again, there isn't a lot of stuff that you could point to a point. The exception being William Burroughs. William Burroughs loved to derange the senses through experimenting with things like, well, getting deep into his dreams. Him and Brian Geisen came up with the dream machine that allowed you to invite dream imagery into your waking life using strobes. Or that circular thing, if you've ever seen that. Those are fun. And many other things. So he was tapped into this occult knowledge more than almost anyone. And particularly the work of Carlos Castaneda, which for me was the big breakthrough in understanding the new vision. And so I'm going to say a little bit about his stuff now. Actually, this is a perfect place to stop. So I'm going to call this part 1, and I'm going to go into Castaneda and some of the other things in the next part. Anyway, if you're still here, thanks for hanging on, and yeah, this is really exciting and fun to get this out there. All right.